at the Probe methodology, we find that we can almost compare it as a GPS. Now, years ago, we used to have, well, nowadays people have Garmin's on their watches, Garmin watches, but years ago we had like this big thing that almost looked like an iPad mini or a mini tablet, which we called a Garmin. That was literally the thing that helped you to navigate maps and navigate roads and places where you'd never gone before. That was long before we had smartphones where you just simply had Google Maps on your phone. So you can imagine I ended up giving mine away later on. As a trainee, I bought myself one at some point because I just ended up getting lost too often. So I had one, and then later on when we got smartphones, I gave mine away again because now you've just got Apple Maps or Google Maps or whatever the case is. So the methodology is essentially like I want to come from somewhere and I'm going somewhere. So I always use the analogy of saying, let's say we all want to go for sundowners at Table Mountain tonight. Okay, Table Mountain is in Cape Town, and so that's the destination where we want to end up with. So the first thing we need to do in the Probe methodology is we need to decide on our destination. So in the Probe methodology, we're not going to go to Table Mountain. That's not going to tell us anything in an audit language or in an audit scenario. But where we want to go is the so-called desired audit risk. So the desired audit risk is to say, where do we want to end up with a low enough audit risk that the auditor is happy or comfortable to sign that audit report to say, I am comfortable that I've done enough work that I will not sign the incorrect audit opinion. Right, so that's where do I want to get to? We want to get to Table Mountain. How do we determine that? Just very high level. That is determined by considering the going concern important risk at the planning stage. So having considered basically just acceptance of the client and short understanding of the client, we're saying at this point in time, what do we understand the risk for going concern to be? And then based on that, we determine partially the desired audit risk. The other part that we take into account, and this is relatively unique to the Probe audit methodology, is we take into account not just the users of the financial statements, but whether there is an increased risk to the auditor, because we know that external users will specifically rely on our audit methodology, on our audit report rather. So those two items together work together in the planning documents to determine whether our desired audit risk is going to be minimum, which as you can see is the lowest of the low, very low, which is almost like a middle way for desired audit risk, or low. The highest you can have your desired audit risk is low. No auditor is going to sign an audit report and say, oh, I'm happy to kind of medium-ish, kind of here somewhere in the middle, be happy that I've got enough audit evidence. No. We want to have enough audit evidence to say, oh, there's a small risk that I'm going to sign the wrong audit opinion. I have low risk, audit risk of remaining audit risk that we often refer to. So that in the methodology is referred to as the desired audit risk. All right, so next up then, we know where we want to get to. We want to get to Table Mountain for sundowners tonight. The next point is, how far are you? Where are you? So you might be sitting in Uppington, Bloemfontein, Durban. I have seen from the delegates a variety of different delegates. So you might even not be in Africa or in South Africa. You might not even be in Africa. So how far are you then from Table Mountain in Cape Town in South Africa? So where are you? Now, firstly, I'm in Cape Town, so I'm not too far from there. I can actually still get there quite soon. If I get in my car right now, I can probably be there in about an hour, hour and a half max. Okay, but I can also walk there. You can walk there or get in your car, and you might not even get there by next week. So depending on how far you are, where you are, that's going to determine not just how long it's going to take you to get there, but also how you're going to get there. If you're on Joburg at the moment, you might need to first get on the train, then you're going to get on the plane, then you're going to fly to Cape Town Airport. But guess what? When you get to the airport, you're not at the mountain yet. You need to still take some steps to get to the actual mountain, whether you're going to ride the bus or whatever it is. Okay, so that's essentially what we're doing here. Firstly, where do you want to go? Secondly, where are we? Now, what is it when we determine where are we? So in seeing where are we now, we need to do the risk assessment and assess risk of material misstatement. So in performing our risk assessment procedures, we will document complete a number of documents. So you don't have to worry too much about which documents it is that we're completing, but we will basically assess the risk of material misstatement at financial statement level and overall level, and then determine the level of risk of material misstatement. And then, depending on where you are, whether it is medium 2 or high 3, you will then determine your journey. How are you going to get there? So your journey is basically to determine how will you get to where you want to get? What is the best route? Now, if you use a Google Maps or any of those kind of travel apps these days, you can actually choose to say, what's the best way for me to get there? I want to use public transport. I want to ride my bicycle. I want to use the car. I want to walk there. Right? And then it will determine different types of routes for you. So in the probe methodology, again, what is it that we have? Well, we'll start off with the risk of material misstatement. That's where we are. You might be in Joburg, I'm in Cape Town. And we say we want to go all the way to the desired audit risk. Right. Now, there are some traffic rules here, and there are three very specific traffic rules before we can decide whether we're going to fly, etc., etc. So, traffic rule number 1, whenever there is a significant risk recorded, when I identify significant risk is defined as a risk requiring special audit consideration. So what does that mean? Well, you have to respond to that significant risk. So we will always have significant risk procedures to address a significant risk that we've recorded. Second traffic rule, test of control. Whenever I want to rely on controls, or when I say substantive procedures alone will not give me sufficient appropriate audit evidence, then I must perform control tests. So that's the second traffic rule. And then the third traffic rule is whenever I record a risk, I will always have at least some procedures to perform to address that risk, the required procedures tab. Once I've followed those 3 procedures, I then have options to go and still achieve my desired audit risk, to still travel to my destination. Maybe let me show you these triangles. So we've traveled up to the risk of material misstatement. And in addressing those risks of material misstatement, we have performed significant risks where there are significant risk responses where there were significant risks. We've performed control tests where we wanted to rely on them, and we've performed the required procedures. If I have not yet traveled down that list of highs and mediums all the way to low or minimum as I needed to get to my desired audit risk, if I'm not at my destination yet, Table Mountain, then I can choose how best to get there. And my options are extended test of detail, extended analytical review, or sampling. All right, so that's in really a short highlight, the audit methodology. Now, what is the difference between these? Required procedures, the steps in the program says you will select all material items, individually material items. So if we think about let's say my trade receivables or something like that, I'll select the individually material items, those that exceed my specific materiality. Extended test of detail, those are the ones that are individually significant. So there normally we use a slightly lower value of materiality, which we normally call individually significant. It's more or less a quarter of the performance materiality or specific materiality, but your firm has a way of determining it for yourself. That's just the default. An extended analytical review is more detailed analytical, or if none of those work, I can also do sampling. Sampling will get me to the point where I want to be. Sampling often has a lot of items to select, and that is why very often people don't like doing field work, because they say it's just ticking and bashing and ticking and bashing, but it doesn't have to be. It could also just be a way of saying, well, I maybe didn't need to do sampling. I'd actually already arrived at Table Mountain, and then instead of just going up with a cable car, I chose to actually walk up the rocks and climb the route, which actually wasn't necessary. Or maybe I climbed down the other side of Table Mountain and then realized that's not the view I wanted and had to climb back again. Okay, so sampling sometimes can be over auditing. Not always, but it can be. All right, that's the highlight of the methodology. And then to just quickly touch on completing the audit work programs or the work programs. you need to consider a list of questions in the work program after performing the work. Now, those questions actually require you to really think about what you've done in the audit. So it will prompt you for considerations of whether you identified any going concern instances, whether there was anything indicating possible fraud, things like that, that will help you to determine whether you can sign off, but let's call it a clean audit opinion, or whether there is additional work required. So for example, if you identify misstatements, it will prompt you to go and do additional work. If you identify misstatements that are not material, to consider, are these items such that I need to do more work, or can I still sign off the work program? All right, so that there is a whole session in one of the recordings to take you through specifically the Probe work program conclusion. Then, right at the bottom of the work program, what do we do then? How do we go about in the conclusion right at the end before we can sign off as satisfactory or not satisfactory? Well, if we apply that link to the methodology, how far did we travel? How much assurance did we get from the procedures that we performed? So we've planned procedures, and we will conclude, here are with the procedures that we planned. That's the risk assessment, control testing possibly. And we will conclude here in terms of saying how much assurance did I get from required procedures, substantive sampling, etc. So that I can ask myself, did I get to the point where I want to be? And if we think about, did I stop short of my destination? Does the estimated audit risk exceed desired audit risk? So is it still more than the desired audit risk? In my screenshot, I know it's small, but it says my desired audit risk is low. Have I traveled all the way to low? Well, in our case, I can see a medium 1 there. I can see minimum, which is lower than low, very low and low. But this one for EO is still higher than my desired audit risk of low. So I either need to do additional work, or if I've done everything I could and I still can't conclude, then I did not get sufficient appropriate audit evidence. In this case, I did not actually arrive at Table Mountain. How disappointing would that be when the sun sets and you're only still halfway between your destination or between where you started off and your destination? You have not achieved sufficient appropriate audit evidence. Can you conclude that you've got satisfactory audit evidence? In other words, you did arrive at your destination at Table Mountain. Maybe it went a little bit past, that's fine. At least you got to your destination as well. Right. Good, so that was the highlights then in terms of the methodology. And then to end us off, before I just have a look at some possible outstanding questions, the next sessions, as we said then, is on the 7th of March from 9 to 12. And there we will address cash and cash equivalents, operating expenses, and employee costs. Please go and take some time to go listen to those recordings. Remember, specifically complete the sections relevant to your methodology, to the probe sessions. And then on the 11th of April, so that's just over a month away from the next one, then is journal entries, related income and other income, work, how to do field work on those ones. And then we're also considering substantive and control testing sheets, the probe sampling sheets, if you want. So there's a recording again on how to use them, the detail on how to complete them, but we'll also address them then on the in the session on the 11th of March. In terms of questions, I see on the conclusions, can we change the conclusion manually? Yes, you can change the conclusion, because remember, you are always applying your professional judgment. So you will see that in terms of estimated audit risk remaining, you can override that because it's in a gray block. So you apply your judgment and you then complete that. And then for the conclusion here, you literally use a drop-down menu to say satisfactory or not satisfactory or unsatisfactory. So yes, you can complete that manually, right? And change it as well. Okay, you are applying a professional judgment. There's also space there to document what you considered, why you thought of that, etc., in determining whether it is satisfactory or not, what you took into account, what your consideration was.